Throughout World of Warcraft's history, dungeons have been a mainstay when it comes to leveling. One of the most famous dungeons of all times, the Dead Mines, was a low-level dungeon. One of the best dungeons ever made, Blackrock Depths, was more so used for leveling than gearing. But things have changed over the years: design, purpose, and the game around the dungeons. In Retail WoW, we have access to 10 unique dungeon lists across 9 different expansions. What if you were to only level through dungeons? Which list is the best to queue for? I'm setting out on a journey to answer exactly that, starting with the oldest dungeons on the list, the Burning Crusade. I realized I did a similar adventure before, but that was more focused on questing with a polite mention to dungeons, with the idea that you queued while questing. This is a deep dive on dungeons themselves, so we are going to have some new categories and criteria. The categories are design, how good the dungeons themselves are; efficiency, how good the dungeons are for leveling; gearing, what you can expect to get from the dungeons; and overall, a final score to tie everything together. I'll explain more in detail when each section comes up, and since I already have some abridged opinions in my last series, we can look at my previous opinions to see if anything has changed, starting with the Burning Crusade dungeons are the oldest in the game. That comes with its perks and drawbacks. For example, the entire dungeon pool is on the table. Some later expansions have max level only dungeons that are excluded for leveling queues. TBC throws the whole lot in, which is a whole lot because there are 16 dungeons on offer. Even Sunwell Plateau, which released in the last patch of the Burning Crusade, is available for leveling. On the downside, class design and dungeon design are just different now. This is both a positive and a negative actually, but the biggest example I can give is the debuffs. Back then, healers could cleanse things instantly with no cooldown. In current World of Warcraft, cleanse is on an 8-second CD. There are multiple bosses and packs that will debuff the entire group, and you have to choose 1 or 2 people that are getting cleansed. It's not an issue for low-level healers because they can just heal through it, but if you are a level 68 Resto Druid, good luck. I'm speaking from experience here. The upside of the changes is the pure amount of AoE that we have nowadays. So these dungeons are fast, but more on that later. But what about the actual dungeon designs? Outside of the Caverns of Time dungeons, TBC does pretty well. This is what made me give them a high rating originally. These dungeons have so much character without going over the top on their designs. A lot of dungeons today go for spectacle over design, and I'm not saying that's inherently bad, but I really do appreciate that TBC dungeons say a whole lot without getting in the way of things. Look at Hellfire Ramparts, one of the shortest dungeons in existence. It is all about the players clearing the walls of orc fortifications. You have camps, officers, supplies, and plenty of soldiers. Everything here paints a picture without getting overly complicated. A quick mission, in and out in under 10 minutes. It just works. If you are someone who enjoys a more grounded feeling, where your character isn't the chosen one but you are helping a cause, Burning Crusade dungeons encapsulate that wonderfully. I enjoy the overall list, none of them are too long, which is great for leveling, and since we are dealing with a quantifiable number of dungeons, I can get even more specific. Here's the list of dungeons with a very scientific color system. Green means I like it, yellow means it's alright/adequate, and red means I don't like it. Very simple and effective. As I said before, the 2 Caverns of Time dungeons kinda suck, but overall the list is either good or okay. I will say that there isn't a super standout dungeon here. I already mentioned the Hellfire Ramparts being pretty good, but it's too simple to call it a masterpiece. Thankfully, the pool is so big that I only got the escape from Durnhold dungeon once, and I never set foot in the Dark Portal dungeon. The big plus that TBC dungeons have are the quests that they give. These quests are inside the actual instances, and you can complete basically every single one of them in one run of the dungeon. They typically have 3 per dungeon and is pretty much a free level. One more thing to mention before the design rating, it won't impact things too much, but TBC dungeons do give you reputation for doing them in the random dungeon finder, because technically you are doing the heroic version of them, so if you're looking to farm some reputation and level a character, it's a good combination. But is this list a good combination? I think so. There are some outdated mechanics in them, but you can mostly power through those. The amount of fears can get annoying, but it's not a crazy amount. These dungeons become better the more you know what you're doing. Granted, you could say that about a lot of things, but I'm gonna rate the dungeon dungeon design of TBC a 7 out of 10. If there were more standout dungeons to counteract the old mechanics, I'd rate this section higher, but a 7 is not a bad score, especially compared to how the questing in TBC aged. The dungeons are in a perfectly good spot, like a wine that is a bit of an acquired taste, one that can be boosted if the first time you did have a taste of it was under a beautiful sunset. The nostalgia possibility is out the roof, but perhaps their designs actually benefit them in the next section. When it comes to dungeon leveling, how long it takes can vary based on multiple factors. What role are you playing? What time of day are you queuing for the dungeons? Are there any leveling events going on, either in favor or against them? So instead of the good old slash played, we are going to have to get more technical. I will still give my total time, but it's not the focus here. Instead, the important numbers will be how many dungeons did it take? How long did I actually spend in those dungeons? Because this is the first test in the series, this will set a benchmark until I get more information. That being said, as a healer main, dungeon leveling is my bread and butter, so I have plenty of prior experience to go off of. It's just without the 25% warband buff, which I do have fully enabled, keep that in mind. From level 10 to 70, it took me a total of 30 dungeons, averaging exactly 2 levels per dungeon. I did it all as a healer, so I would actually get queued for TBC Dungeons, but I will note I plan to queue around the same time of day every week just to make sure the overall played times are as consistent as possible, even if it doesn't matter as much for the rating, because it may matter to you. When queuing during prime time as a healer, I never once got a queue longer than 5 minutes, resulting in a total slash played time of a little under 7 hours, which I was honestly surprised at. I expected it to be much faster. It definitely felt faster, probably because of those 7 hours I spent 4 hours and 48 minutes in the dungeons, with an average dungeon length of 9.5 minutes. The difference in playtime versus dungeon time felt a bit off, but then I realized if every dungeon had a 3-minute wait in between them, that would add an entire extra hour and a half to the slash played time at least. So it tracks, I only AFK'd a little bit. The fastest dungeon was a Hellfire Ramparts run that took 3 minutes and 32 seconds, thanks to a level 12 warrior tank, with the longest dungeon being a run from the Arcatraz at 15 minutes and 17 seconds, but that was a bit of an outlier. The only slog would be Escape from Durnhold, which has a decent amount of RP. A more reasonable longest length was around 12 minutes. So how is this in the rating? I don't really know. It's faster than any questing, but not by too much overall. Specifically, the dungeons are faster. I think that as this series develops, the most important number will be how much time is spent in the actual dungeons. It will be the most accurate representation of how efficient they are. An expansion with longer dungeons will take less dungeons overall, but it will take longer overall because you get fewer completion rewards. Again, we'll have to see how things shape up. If I need to change the rating in the final video, I will, but otherwise I am rating the dungeon efficiency of TBC an 8 out of 10. To be honest, I'm being a little conservative on it, but it really did feel great. Short dungeons might be the way to go thanks to the end dungeon bonus XP being so strong. It would most often give me an entire level just by itself, not to mention that they have the quests, which also give you a whole extra level per dungeon. If you want to risk it, you can save the turn-ins for a higher level. It will still give a good portion of a level's worth of XP, not to mention better item level on the gear. Speaking of end dungeon and quest rewards, they also give you a satchel that drops gear. So let's talk about this is going to function exactly like it did in my last series, because the goal will not change at all. Actually, it's probably even more important this time, as the benchmark was always the ability to queue War Within Dungeons by level 70, which requires a minimum item level of 350. I'm going to make one addition to this series specifically. In an attempt to bridge the gap between this section and those who will be using heirlooms when they level, I am going to have 2 item levels listed, the actual item level that I got, and an adjusted item level that replaced any bad gear with heirlooms. The ability for an expansion to reach 350 with heirlooms will matter, but nowhere near as much as the gear score flat out from running the dungeons. So how did TBC do? A lot better than its questing, that's for sure, but it wasn't looking like that until the last second. I had gone the entire 30 dungeons without getting a single upgrade for my gloves, until the very final dungeon where the completion bag gave me an upgrade for them, resulting in a total item level of 337, which would rank pretty high in the questing tests. But I would hope the dungeons give better loot than questing, to be honest. Putting some heirlooms on, I got to item level 347. I only had a trinket and a ring that were replaceable, with the trinket being the biggest gap. Granted, I was playing a healer, and healers sometimes get bonus quests for gearing, kinda my bonus for being such a good teammate, so keep that in mind. For consistency, I won't be docking any points just because I'm playing a healer. As for gold, it was a respectable 5,000. I was expecting less based on how much I had around level 30, it was under 1,000 at the time, so I am pleasantly surprised and interested to see just how high it can go in other expansions. It would need to beat 7,500 to best the highest questing total. And once again, I have to mention the quest, as some of them do give pretty good gear, including trinkets. This brings the TBC gearing score to a 9 out of 10. It is pretty close to the 350 goal, maybe a world quest or two in the War Within and you hit the mark, especially if you are using heirlooms. The drop chances feel pretty nice, and the variety from the dungeon packs is large enough to count. I am happy that the Burning Crusade has something to be proud of when it comes to chromie time. The questing was a big disappointment compared to what it was in TBC Classic, but I do really think the dungeons hold up. They show their age, yes, but it's that age that actually has something to offer. These dungeons were actually designed with leveling in mind, unlike some later expansions. They have extra XP sources like quests to offer, also unlike later expansions. However, I can't ignore some of the things that just don't work in retail these days, like the old debuff system, so it can't get a perfect score. And with no dungeons that really thrive, I have to take another point off there. But for having one of the biggest dungeon pools, the fact that most of them are either alright or good says something. I'm giving the overall dungeon score an 8 out of 10. I can't really go higher, and I did consider a 7. When I originally rated them, I did give it an 8, so it does stay consistent. However, ironically, if we were going off my original criteria in the last series I did, it would actually have gone down to a 7 out of 10 based off my testing this week. Just the fact that I have numbers to back up my claims now, I feel better about my original score. I hope that wasn't too confusing to follow. It does make me excited to test the other dungeon lists. If you have any suggestions for things to look out for, maybe some criteria to add, let me know. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like. Let me know your thoughts on TBC Dungeons. My name has been Kale. Have a wonderful journey.